I never thought living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, would turn into the most surreal experience of my life. But here I was, standing in my driveway at 9 in the evening, facing two men in police uniforms who were telling me I was under arrest for violating community guidelines. My name is Lucas Wilson, and I had moved into the Sunset Ridge community 6 months ago after landing a great job as a software engineer at a tech startup downtown. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent backyard, and the neighborhood seemed pleasant enough during my initial visits. What I didn't realize was that the homeowners association was run by a woman named Patricia Kendrick, who treated the community rules like they were federal law and herself, like she was judge, jury, and executioner. The trouble started about 3 months into my residency. I had painted my front door a deep navy blue, replacing the builder-grade beige that every other house on the street seemed to have. I thought it looked distinguished and added some character to the place. 2 days after I finished the project, I found a violation notice taped to my mailbox. The letter, printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, informed me that my door color was not on the approved list and that I had 14 days to remedy the situation or face fines of $50 per day. I called the number on the letter and reached Patricia herself. Her voice was sharp and nasal, the kind of tone that immediately put you on the defensive. "Mr. Wilson, the rules are very clear," she said when I questioned the violation. "All exterior paint colors must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before application. You failed to submit the proper paperwork." "I wasn't aware there was paperwork for painting my own front door," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "It's just a door. It's not like I painted the entire house purple or something." "The rules don't differentiate based on the size of the project," Patricia snapped. "A rule is a rule. You have 14 days, Mr. Wilson. I suggest you use them wisely." I hung up feeling frustrated but not particularly worried. Surely this woman couldn't be serious about fining me $50 a day over a door color. I decided to do some research into the HOA bylaws, which led me down a rabbit hole of discovering just how many absurd rules this community had. Grass couldn't be longer than 3 inches. No vehicles could be parked on the street overnight. Garbage cans had to be hidden from view except on collection days. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for 2 weeks before and 1 week after the holiday. The list went on and on. What really caught my attention, though, was a clause buried deep in the documents about the enforcement powers of the HOA. It stated that the board had the authority to take all necessary measures to ensure compliance with community standards, which seemed incredibly vague and potentially overreaching. I made a mental note to attend the next HOA meeting and raise some concerns. The 14 days came and went. I had decided, perhaps stubbornly, not to repaint my door. It was a matter of principle at this point. The navy blue looked good, it wasn't offensive or garish, and I had paid good money for the paint and my time. Sure enough, on day 15, another notice appeared on my mailbox. This one informed me that I was being fined $50 per day starting immediately, and that the fees would be added to my quarterly HOA dues. I called Patricia again. This time, she was even less friendly. "Mr. Wilson, you were given ample opportunity to correct your violation," she said. "Now you'll pay the consequences. The fines will continue until you repaint that door an approved color. I have a list I can email you if you've somehow misplaced your community handbook." "This is ridiculous," I said, feeling my temper rise. "You can't just fine people arbitrarily for something as minor as a door color. This is my property. Actually, Mr. Wilson, when you purchased your home, You signed a contract agreeing to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. You might want to review that document. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, incredulous at what was happening. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted. Patricia started showing up at my house unannounced, walking around my property with a clipboard, documenting every tiny thing she could possibly construe as a violation. My grass was apparently a quarter-inch too long one week. I had left my garbage can visible from the street for an extra hour after collection. A garden hose wasn't properly coiled in my backyard. Each violation came with its own notice and its own fine. Within a month, the HOA claimed I owed them over $3,000. I consulted with a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, a pleasant guy named Robert Chen, who had seen cases like mine before. Unfortunately, HOAs in Arizona have pretty broad authority, Robert explained during our consultation. However, this Patricia woman seems to be going overboard. The fines have to be reasonable and proportionate to the violation. $50 a day for a door color is excessive. I think we can fight this, but I have to warn you, these cases can drag on for months or even years. What are my options? I asked. You can try to negotiate with the board, attend the meetings, and plead your case to the other members. Sometimes these situations are driven by one tyrannical board member, and the others aren't really paying attention. Or we can file a lawsuit challenging the fines and the enforcement actions. That's more expensive and time-consuming, but it might be necessary if Patricia won't back down. I decided to try the diplomatic approach first. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that also served as a clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early and found about a dozen other residents already there, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table at the front of the room. Patricia sat at the center of the table, flanked by two other board members I recognized from around the neighborhood. To her right was Dennis Marshall, a retired accountant who always seemed to be washing his car. To her left was Brenda Foster, a quiet woman in her 60s who I had only spoken to once when she welcomed me to the neighborhood with a plate of cookies. The meeting started promptly at 7. Patricia ran through the standard agenda items, financial reports, upcoming events, maintenance schedules. Everything was delivered in her clipped, authoritative tone. When the floor was opened for resident comments, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Wilson," Patricia said, and I could hear the disdain in her voice. "I assume you're here to discuss your numerous violations." Several heads turned to look at me. I stood up, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'm here to discuss what I believe is an unfair and excessive enforcement of rules that are themselves unreasonable," I said. "I painted my front door a tasteful navy blue, and I've been fined thousands of dollars for it. Meanwhile, I've had the HOA president trespassing on my property weekly, looking for things to cite me for. This isn't what a community association is supposed to be about." A few people nodded, which was encouraging. Patricia's face, however, had turned an interesting shade of red. "Mr. Wilson, I do not trespass. As HOA president, I have every right to inspect properties for compliance, and the rules are the rules. If you don't like them, you shouldn't have moved here. The rules should serve the community, not the other way around," I countered. "And the enforcement should be reasonable. A $50 per day fine for a door color is not reasonable by any standard." Dennis finally spoke up. "Patricia, I have to say, that does seem a bit steep. Maybe we could reduce the fine, or give Mr. Wilson another chance to correct it without the financial penalty." Patricia whipped her head toward Dennis so fast I thought she might get whiplash. We cannot show favoritism or weakness. If we let one person slide, everyone will think they can break the rules. It's not about favoritism, I said. It's about common sense and proportional enforcement. I'm asking the board to reconsider the fines and to take a look at whether Patricia should be conducting weekly inspections of my property. The meeting devolved from there. Patricia refused to budge on anything, and while Dennis and even Brenda seemed somewhat sympathetic, they ultimately deferred to Patricia's judgment. I left feeling defeated and more convinced than ever that I was dealing with someone who had let a tiny bit of power go completely to her head. That's when things got weird. 2 weeks after the meeting, I received a formal letter from something called Desert Valley Compliance Services. The letter, on official-looking letterhead complete with a badge logo, informed me that I was in violation of multiple community codes and that a compliance officer would be conducting a mandatory inspection of my property within 72 hours. Failure to comply could result in legal action. I had never heard of Desert Valley Compliance Services. A quick internet search turned up nothing, no website, no reviews, no business registration I could find. I called Robert Chen again. "This smells fishy," he said after I read him the letter. "I've never heard of this company, and HOAs don't typically hire outside enforcement agencies for minor violations like paint colors. Can you scan and email me the letter? I want to take a closer look." I sent him the document and waited for his analysis. He called me back within an hour. "Lucas, this is either a scam or something worse," Robert said, his voice grave. "The letterhead uses official-looking seals and language, but there's no legitimate business by this name registered in Arizona. The address listed is a UPS store in Tempe. I think your HOA president might be trying to intimidate you with fake authority. You think Patricia is behind this? I'd bet money on it. The question is what she's planning to do next. I'd recommend you call the Scottsdale police non-emergency line and make them aware of the situation. If someone shows up claiming to be a compliance officer, you want the cops to already have a record of your concerns." I took Robert's advice and called the police that evening. The officer who took my report was professional but didn't seem overly concerned. He told me to call 911 if anyone showed up and tried to enter my property without permission, and that they'd have a unit respond. He also took down Patricia's name and the information about the suspicious letter. 3 days later, right on schedule, I got my answer about what Patricia had planned. I was in my home office, finishing up some code for work when my doorbell rang at 8:30 in the evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole before opening the door. 2 men in police uniforms stood on my front porch, their faces stern and official-looking. My heart started racing. Had something happened? Was there an emergency in the neighborhood? I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked. The taller of the 2 men, a muscular guy with a shaved head and a thick mustache, nodded curtly. "Are you Lucas Wilson?" "I am. What's this about?" "We're with Desert Valley Compliance Services," the man said. "We need to conduct an inspection of your property due to multiple code violations reported by your homeowners association. We also need to discuss your failure to comply with community regulations, which may result in criminal charges." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing at once. These weren't real cops. The uniforms looked authentic enough at first glance, but now that I was really looking, I could see differences. The badges were slightly off. The patches on the shoulders said Desert Valley Compliance instead of Scottsdale Police Department. And real cops wouldn't show up to enforce HOA rules or threaten criminal charges over a door color. I'm going to need to see some identification, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The second man, shorter with a thick build and a face that looked like it had seen a few bar fights, stepped forward aggressively. "Sir, we're authorized law enforcement officers. You need to cooperate with this inspection immediately or you will be placed under arrest." "You're not law enforcement officers," I said, "and you need to leave my property right now." The tall one reached for his belt, where what looked like a real gun was holstered. "Mr. Wilson, we're not going to ask again. Open this door and submit to the inspection, or we'll be forced to take action." I slammed the door shut and immediately called 911. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. "911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice was a relief. "There are 2 men at my house dressed as police officers, but they're not real cops," I said quickly. "They're trying to intimidate me and they're armed. I think they're working for my HOA president. I need real police here now." "Are you in a safe location?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm inside my house with the doors locked. They're still outside. Stay on the line with me. I'm dispatching officers to your location immediately. Do not engage with these men. Are they trying to break in?" I moved to the window and carefully looked out through the blinds. The 2 fake cops were standing on my porch talking to each other. The tall one was on his phone, apparently calling someone. I could see him getting agitated, gesturing with his free hand. "They're still on the porch," I told the dispatcher. "One of them is on the phone." "Units are 3 minutes away," she assured me. "Stay inside and away from the doors and windows if possible." I watched from my vantage point as the scene unfolded. The fake cops seemed to be having a heated discussion. The shorter one kept pointing at my door, like he wanted to try to force entry. The tall one appeared to be arguing against it. Then I saw headlights turn onto my street. 2 Scottsdale Police Department patrol cars pulled up to my house, lights flashing but no sirens. 4 real officers got out, hands near their weapons, and approached my porch with the practiced caution of actual law enforcement, who had no idea what situation they were walking into. "Scottsdale PD," one of the officers shouted. "Put your hands where we can see them." The dispatcher was still on the line with me. "Mr. Wilson, officers are on scene. When they secure the situation, they'll let you know it's safe to come out." Through the window, I watched what happened next with a mixture of relief and vindication. The 2 fake cops tried to play it cool at first. The tall one started talking to the real officers, probably trying to explain who they were and what they were doing. But the real cops weren't buying it. Within seconds, both fake cops were being told to put their hands behind their heads. One of the real officers was examining the fake cop's uniform and badge closely. Even from inside my house, I could see the officer's expression change from cautious to angry when he realized what he was looking at. The fake cops were quickly handcuffed and placed in the back of separate patrol cars. A knock on my door made me jump. "Mr. Wilson, this is Scottsdale PD. It's safe to come out now." I ended the call with the dispatcher and opened my door. A female officer with short blonde hair and a name tag that read Martinez stood there with a reassuring smile. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just shaken up. Those guys were trying to force their way in. We've got them in custody." "Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" I gave Officer Martinez the full rundown, starting with the HOA dispute, Patricia's escalating harassment, the fake letter from Desert Valley Compliance Services, and finally tonight's visit from the fake cops. She took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You have that letter from this Desert Valley company?" she asked. "I do. I also reported it to your department a few days ago because my attorney thought it was suspicious." Smart move. Let me talk to my sergeant, and we'll probably need to get a full statement from you. We're also going to need to have a conversation with your HOA president. Another officer, a tall Hispanic man with sergeant stripes on his sleeve, joined us on the porch. Officer Martinez quickly briefed him on the situation. "This is Sergeant Rodriguez," she said. "He's going to take lead on this investigation." Sergeant Rodriguez extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Wilson, I'm going to be straight with you. Impersonating a police officer is a serious crime in Arizona. It's a Class 6 felony. If your HOA president hired these men to intimidate you, she's looking at conspiracy charges as well. We need to verify the connection between these men and Patricia Kendrick." "I'm happy to cooperate however I can," I said. "Good. First, let's get your formal statement. Then we're going to go have a talk with Miss Kendrick tonight. I have a feeling she's going to be very surprised to see us." Over the next hour, I provided a detailed statement to Sergeant Rodriguez. I showed him all the violation notices, the letter from Desert Valley Compliance Services, emails from Patricia, everything I had documenting the HOA dispute. I also gave him Robert Chen's contact information, since my attorney had been involved in analyzing the fake compliance letter. "This is thorough," Sergeant Rodriguez said, reviewing the documents. "It's clear there's been an escalating pattern of harassment. The question is whether we can definitively link Miss Kendrick to those two men we arrested tonight." As if on cue, one of the other officers approached with a cell phone in an evidence bag. "Sergeant, you're going to want to see this. We found this phone on the tall suspect. His recent call log shows multiple calls to and from a Patricia Kendrick. The last call was made at approximately 8:35 tonight, right when Mr. Wilson here would have closed the door on them." Sergeant Rodriguez's expression hardened. "That's our connection. Martinez, you and Henderson come with me. We're going to pay Miss Kendrick a visit." "Mr. Wilson, you should be safe for tonight, but I'd recommend staying alert. If anyone else contacts you claiming to be from any kind of compliance or enforcement agency, call 911 immediately." I watched as 3 patrol cars left my house, heading deeper into the neighborhood toward Patricia's house, which I knew was about 6 streets over. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me exhausted and oddly shaky. I went inside, locked all the doors, and tried to process what had just happened. My phone rang around 11. It was Sergeant Rodriguez. "Mr. Wilson, I wanted to update you personally," he said. "We arrested Patricia Kendrick tonight." She initially denied any involvement, but when we told her about the phone records connecting her to the suspects, she broke down pretty quickly. Turns out she hired these two men, both of whom have criminal records, by the way, to scare you into compliance. She paid them $500 to show up in fake police uniforms and threaten you with arrest. "Jesus," I muttered. "She really went that far over a door color, seems like it." She's being charged with conspiracy to commit impersonation of a peace officer, criminal intimidation, and we're looking into possible fraud charges related to the HOA fines she's been levying. The two men she hired are facing multiple felonies each. This is going to be a significant case. "What happens now?" I asked. "There'll be an investigation, and eventually this will go to trial unless they take plea deals. You'll likely be called as a witness. In the meantime, I'd suggest your HOA might want to hold an emergency meeting to elect new leadership. I don't think Miss Kendrick will be president much longer." I thanked Sergeant Rodriguez and hung up. Despite the late hour, I felt wired and knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I sent a text to Robert Chen with a brief update. His response came back almost immediately. "Holy shit, call me first thing tomorrow." The next morning, I woke up to find my phone flooded with messages. Apparently, word had spread through the neighborhood about Patricia's arrest. Several neighbors had texted or called expressing shock and, in some cases, their own stories of harassment from Patricia that they had been too afraid to speak up about. Dennis Marshall, the other HOA board member, called me around 9 in the morning. He sounded shaken. "Lucas, I need to apologize," he said. "I had no idea Patricia had gone this far. None of us did. Brenda and I talked last night after the police came to my house asking questions, and we're calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening. Patricia is being removed from the board effective immediately, and we need to discuss how to move forward as a community." "I appreciate that, Dennis," I said. "I never wanted any of this to become such a huge thing. I just wanted to live in my house without being harassed." "I understand, and you're right. Patricia took her authority way too far, and frankly, a lot of these rules are ridiculous. We're going to be proposing some major changes to the bylaws. I hope you'll attend the meeting tomorrow." I promised I would. Over the course of that day, I received visits from several neighbors. Some came to apologize for not speaking up when they saw Patricia targeting me. Others came to share their own grievances about the HOA's overreach. A few people even mentioned that they had received their own threatening letters from Desert Valley Compliance Services, but had paid the fines rather than risk confrontation. That information was passed along to Sergeant Rodriguez, who told me it strengthened the case against Patricia considerably. If she had been using the fake compliance company to intimidate multiple residents, it showed a pattern of criminal behavior rather than a one-time lapse in judgment. Robert Chen and I met for coffee that afternoon. He was practically giddy with professional satisfaction. "This is the most clear-cut HOA abuse case I've ever seen," he said. "Patricia Kendrick is going to jail, Lucas. There's no way around it, and you're going to have grounds for a substantial civil lawsuit against both her personally and possibly the HOA for the harassment you endured." "I'm not really interested in a big lawsuit," I told him. "I just want the fines dropped and to be able to live in peace." "That's definitely going to happen, but you should at least consider recovering your attorney fees and any costs you incurred dealing with this situation. It sends a message that this kind of behavior has real consequences." I agreed to think about it. For now, I just wanted things to get back to normal. The emergency HOA meeting the next evening was packed. Nearly every house in the neighborhood had someone in attendance. The small community center was standing room only. Dennis Marshall ran the meeting, with Brenda Foster beside him. They had also invited an attorney who specialized in HOA governance to help guide the discussion. Dennis started by addressing what everyone was there to hear about. "As you all know by now, Patricia Kendrick was arrested 2 nights ago for her involvement in a scheme to intimidate residents using fake police officers. On behalf of the remaining board members, I want to apologize to Lucas Wilson and to anyone else who was targeted by Patricia's illegal activities. This is not what our community should be about." The room erupted in applause and murmurs of agreement. Dennis waited for quiet before continuing. "We need to make some significant changes. First, all fines that were levied under Patricia's enforcement regime are being reviewed. If you believe you were fined unfairly, we'll have a process to contest those fines and potentially receive refunds. Second, we're going to be proposing amendments to our bylaws to make the rules more reasonable and to add checks and balances to prevent any one board member from wielding this kind of power again." Over the next 2 hours, the community engaged in the most productive HOA meeting I could imagine. People suggested reasonable modifications to the most onerous rules. The paint color restrictions were loosened significantly to allow for any color that could be considered tasteful and not overly garish. The parking restrictions were modified to allow overnight street parking in designated areas. The fine structure was completely overhauled to ensure penalties were proportional to violations. Several people stood up to share their own experiences with Patricia's enforcement tactics. An elderly man named George told a story about being fined for having his Christmas lights up 3 days past the allowed date, even though he had been in the hospital and physically couldn't take them down. A single mother named Jennifer described being threatened with liens against her property because her lawn had weeds after her lawnmower broke, and she couldn't afford to replace it immediately. By the end of the meeting, it felt like the community had come together in a way that actually reflected the original intent of a homeowners association. We were neighbors looking out for each other and trying to maintain a pleasant place to live, not subjects under the thumb of a petty tyrant. I was asked to serve on the newly restructured Architectural Review Committee, which I accepted. If I was going to be involved, I might as well help ensure the rules were applied fairly and reasonably going forward. The criminal case against Patricia Kendrick moved through the system over the following months. She was formally charged with conspiracy to impersonate a peace officer, criminal intimidation, fraud, and several other related crimes. The 2 men she had hired, whose names I learned were Travis Bennett and Kyle Shaw, were each charged with felony impersonation of a peace officer, criminal intimidation while armed, and attempted extortion. I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing, where I recounted the entire saga for the judge and the attorneys involved. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint her as a well-intentioned community leader who had made a terrible mistake, but the prosecution had overwhelming evidence of premeditation and planning. The phone records, the money trail showing Patricia's payment to Travis and Kyle, the multiple fake letters sent to different residents, all of it added up to a clear pattern of criminal behavior. Travis and Kyle both took plea deals relatively quickly. They each pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for their testimony against Patricia. Travis received 2 years in state prison. Kyle got 18 months. Both were required to pay restitution to the victims of their intimidation scheme. Patricia held out longer, but eventually the weight of the evidence was too much. About 6 months after her arrest, she accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to conspiracy charges and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also required to pay $20,000 in restitution to the HOA and individual residents for the fraudulent fines and costs associated with her scheme. At the sentencing hearing, the judge had some pointed words for Patricia. "Miss Kendrick, you were given a position of trust within your community. Instead of using that position to serve your neighbors, you used it to terrorize them. You hired criminals to impersonate police officers, one of the most serious breaches of public trust in our society. You extorted money from your neighbors over trivial matters. Your behavior was not just criminal, it was cruel. I hope you use your time in custody to reflect on the harm you've caused." I attended the sentencing hearing, along with several other neighbors. There was a sense of closure watching Patricia be led away in handcuffs. The woman who had made so many people's lives miserable over things as petty as door colors and grass length was finally being held accountable. The civil side of things was resolved more quietly. Robert Chen negotiated a settlement with the HOA's insurance company that covered all my attorney fees, the cost of repainting my door that they had originally demanded, and some additional compensation for the harassment and stress. I ended up keeping my navy blue door, which the newly revised bylaws had explicitly allowed as an approved color. The HOA itself underwent a complete transformation. Dennis Marshall was elected president in a proper election, and several new, reasonable people joined the board. The bylaws were formally amended to include actual due process for violations, reasonable fine structures, and term limits for board members. An oversight committee was established to review any enforcement actions before fines could be levied. More importantly, the culture of the neighborhood changed. People started actually talking to each other as neighbors rather than viewing each other as potential rule violators. The community events became actual social gatherings rather than Patricia's lecture sessions. The Facebook group for the neighborhood, which had been a toxic cesspool of violation reports and complaints, turned into a place where people shared recipes, coordinated yard sales, and helped each other out. About a year after the whole ordeal, I was outside on a Saturday morning doing some gardening when Jennifer, the single mother from the meeting, walked by with her 2 kids. She waved and came over to chat. "Your yard looks great, Lucas," she said. "And I still love that blue door. Thanks. How are things going with you?" "So much better." "Did you hear? The new board voted to establish a community assistance fund. If someone is struggling financially or physically can't maintain their property, they can apply for help instead of being fined. The fund pays for things like lawn care or minor repairs. They helped me get a new lawnmower last month." "That's fantastic," I said, genuinely pleased. "That's what a community association should actually do. It wouldn't have happened without you standing up to Patricia. A lot of us were too scared, so thank you." After she left, I sat on my porch for a while, looking at my navy blue door and thinking about everything that had happened. It was surreal to think that a decision as simple as painting my front door had led to such an insane chain of events. Fake cops, real arrests, prison sentences, and ultimately, positive change for an entire neighborhood. I had learned some valuable lessons through the experience. The importance of standing up for yourself when authority is being abused. The power of documentation and having a good attorney. The fact that most people are reasonable and want to do the right thing. But sometimes, it takes one person being willing to push back against the unreasonable ones to create space for that reasonableness to flourish. I also learned that homeowners associations, despite their reputation and despite people like Patricia Kendrick, could actually work the way they were intended to work. They could be democratic organizations that served their communities rather than ruling over them. It just required people to pay attention and to be willing to participate in good faith. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert Chen. "Hey, just heard Patricia got denied early release. Parole board said she showed no remorse. Thought you'd want to know." I did want to know, though I felt more sadness than satisfaction at the news. Patricia had destroyed her own life over something so trivial. She had gone from being a community leader, however overbearing, to a convicted felon serving time in prison. And for what? Because she couldn't stand the idea of someone having a blue door instead of a beige one. The whole situation was a cautionary tale about what happens when people get a small amount of power and let it consume them. Patricia could have been a force for good in the neighborhood. She clearly had organizational skills and dedication. If she had channeled those qualities into actually helping people instead of controlling them, she would have been an asset. Instead, she let her need for control turn into something toxic and ultimately criminal. That evening, I hosted a small barbecue in my backyard. Dennis and his wife came, along with Brenda and her husband, George and Jennifer with her kids, and a few other neighbors I had gotten to know better over the past year. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, The kids played in the yard and adults sat around talking and laughing. At one point, Dennis raised his beer in a toast to Lucas for having the guts to stand up to tyranny, even when that tyranny was armed with a clipboard and terrible fashion sense. Everyone laughed and clinked their bottles and glasses together. George added his own toast. And to second chances, this neighborhood is proof that communities can change for the better. As the sun set over Scottsdale and the conversation flowed easily around me, I felt genuinely content. My house felt like home. My neighborhood felt like a community. And my navy blue door, the catalyst for this entire bizarre adventure, looked perfect in the fading light. The Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association still existed, of course. We still had rules and quarterly meetings and the occasional dispute over parking or noise. But now, those things were handled with common sense and compassion. The HOA served the community instead of the other way around. And nobody had to worry about fake cops showing up at their door because their grass was a quarter-inch too long. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the Arizona Attorney General's office. They were conducting a statewide investigation into HOA abuses following the publicity from Patricia's case. Several other neighborhoods had come forward with their own stories of excessive fines, harassment, and in one case, another instance of fake authority being used to intimidate residents. The letter thanked me for my cooperation with the investigation and informed me that they were working on legislative reforms to provide better oversight of HOAs and protect homeowners from the kind of abuse I had experienced. It felt good to know that something positive on a larger scale might come from my ordeal. If Patricia's crimes led to reforms that protected other people from similar harassment, then at least some good would come from the whole mess. I framed that letter and hung it in my home office, right next to a photo of my navy blue front door. Whenever I had a frustrating day at work or dealt with some minor annoyance, I would look at those reminders of what I had been through and gain some perspective. If I could handle fake cops and a felonious HOA president, I could handle just about anything. The following year brought more changes. The Sunset Ridge community was featured in a local news story about HOA reform. A reporter from the Arizona Republic interviewed me, Dennis, and several other residents about our experience and how we had rebuilt the association into something positive. The story went viral locally and even got picked up by some national news outlets. I did a few more interviews, always emphasizing the same points. HOAs aren't inherently bad, but they need proper oversight and checks on power. Homeowners need to be engaged and willing to attend meetings and vote. And when someone in authority is abusing their position, it's important to document everything and not be afraid to push back, even when it's uncomfortable. Patricia's story became something of a cautionary tale in HOA circles. I heard from people around the country who had their own nightmare HOA stories, though thankfully most of them didn't involve fake police officers. There was a whole ecosystem of HOA horror stories out there, and mine had become one of the most infamous. Robert Chen leveraged the publicity into a thriving practice specializing in HOA disputes. He called me occasionally to thank me for the referrals, even though I wasn't actively sending people his way. Apparently, just being the attorney who represented the guy with the blue door was enough to keep his calendar full. Life in Sunset Ridge settled into a pleasant rhythm. The community hosted regular events: summer movie nights in the park, a spring garage sale, a Halloween party for the kids, a holiday lights competition that was genuinely fun rather than the source of fines and stress it had been under Patricia's regime. I dated someone for a while, a woman named Rachel who thought the whole fake cop story was hilarious and impressive in equal measure. She would joke that I should write a book about it. We eventually went our separate ways, but we stayed friends. Work was going well. The startup I had joined was growing, and I got promoted to senior engineer with a nice raise. I put some of that money into home improvements, always making sure to submit the proper paperwork to the Architectural Review Committee, though it was more out of courtesy than fear. The new committee, which I was still part of, approved almost everything as long as it wasn't genuinely offensive or likely to damage property values. I installed solar panels on my roof, updated my landscaping with desert-friendly plants that required less water, and built a nice patio in the backyard. Each project was approved without drama or excessive fees. It was amazing how much more I enjoyed homeownership when I wasn't constantly worried about being fined for trivial violations. On the 2-year anniversary of the night the fake cops showed up at my door, I got a call from Sergeant Rodriguez. We had stayed in touch occasionally, and he had kept me updated on a few related cases that had emerged from the investigation into Patricia's activities. "Lucas, I wanted to let you know that we just closed the last case related to the Kendrick investigation," he said. A contractor she hired to do some work on her house came forward with information that she had tried to get him to file false police reports against you and some other neighbors. We were able to charge her with additional counts of filing a false report and attempting to suborn perjury. The DA added those to her sentence. "How much more time did she get?" I asked. "Another year. She'll be eligible for parole in 2 more years if she maintains good behavior, but with all these charges on her record, I don't think she'll be leading any HOAs when she gets out." We talked for a few more minutes about other things, his family, my work, the state of the neighborhood. Before we hung up, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Lucas, I've been a cop for 23 years. I've dealt with murderers, drug dealers, all kinds of serious criminals. But people like Patricia Kendrick, the ones who abuse positions of trust in their communities, they bother me more than almost anyone else, because they destroy the fabric of everyday life for ordinary people. What you did, standing up to her and seeing it through, that matters. You probably saved a lot of people from years of harassment." After that call, I went outside and stood in front of my house, looking at the navy blue door that had started everything. It needed a fresh coat of paint after 2 years of Arizona sun. I decided I would repaint it the exact same color, maybe even a shade darker. Not because I was trying to make a statement or prove a point, but simply because I liked it and it was my door on my house. The community had movie night that evening in the park. I grabbed a lawn chair and walked over, joining probably 50 other residents spread out on the grass. The movie was some family-friendly animated film that I had seen before, but that wasn't really the point. The point was being part of a community that actually functioned like a community. As I sat there under the stars, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I thought about the journey from that first violation notice about my door to this moment. It had been stressful and scary at times, especially the night those fake cops showed up. But it had also been empowering to stand up for myself and to see real change happen as a result. Dennis sat down next to me with a big bowl of popcorn that he offered to share. "How are you doing, Lucas? Seems like things have been quiet lately." "Quiet is good," I said, taking a handful of popcorn. "Very good. Indeed it is. You know, we got 3 new families moving into the neighborhood next month. I made sure they each got a copy of our revised bylaws and a personal welcome from the board. No more nasty surprises for new residents." "That's great. Have you told them about the neighborhood's colorful history?" I asked with a smile. Dennis laughed. "I gave them the sanitized version, Something like we had some leadership challenges in the past, but we've worked through them and built a much stronger community as a result. I figured I'd save the story about the fake cops for after they've settled in, and we can all laugh about it over beers. The movie started, and conversation died down. I sat there in the comfortable darkness, listening to the soundtrack and the occasional comment from people around me. Kids were running around in the back, playing tag or whatever kids play. Someone had brought their dog, a golden retriever that was making the rounds looking for dropped popcorn. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. People living their lives, respecting each other's space and choices, coming together for community events because they wanted to, not because they were mandated to. The rules we did have made sense and were enforced reasonably. Nobody lived in fear of being fined for having their garbage can visible for an extra hour, or having grass that was a quarter-inch too long. Months turned into more years. I eventually met someone else, a teacher named Sarah who was smart and funny, and didn't think it was weird that I had become somewhat locally famous for being harassed by my HOA. We got serious enough that she moved into my house with the navy blue door. She loved the neighborhood and got involved in organizing the community events. Patricia Kendrick was released from prison after serving 3 years of her sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to New Mexico to live with her sister and had supposedly found work doing bookkeeping for a small business. I hoped she had learned something from her experience, though I would never really know. Travis and Kyle, the fake cops, had also been released after serving their time. I occasionally wondered what they thought about the whole situation, whether they realized how close they had come to potentially shooting someone or seriously hurting someone while playing their dress-up game. Being armed while impersonating police officers could have gone so much worse than it did. The Arizona legislature did eventually pass some HOA reforms, though they were more modest than what the Attorney General's office had initially proposed. HOAs were required to provide more detailed financial disclosures, fines were capped based on the severity of violations, and homeowners were given stronger due process rights before liens could be placed on their properties. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering the reforms. I told my story to a room full of state representatives and senators, explaining how a simple decision to paint my door had spiraled into a criminal conspiracy because one person had too much unchecked power. Several lawmakers asked good questions about what safeguards would have prevented the situation, and I provided thoughtful answers based on my experience. When the law passed, one of the representatives sent me a copy with a note thanking me for my testimony and for being willing to share my story publicly. It was signed by nearly a dozen legislators. I framed that too and hung it next to the letter from the Attorney General's office. Sarah and I eventually got married in a ceremony in our backyard, officiated by Robert Chen, who had gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Most of the neighborhood attended. Dennis gave a toast that referenced my blue door, saying something about how standing up for what you believe in, even in small things, was a sign of good character. Everyone laughed and cheered. We talked about maybe moving to a bigger house, somewhere without an HOA at all. But the truth was, we loved our neighborhood and our community. The Sunset Ridge HOA, in its reformed state, was actually a positive part of living there. The dues went toward things that benefited everyone, maintaining the parks and common areas, organizing events, and helping residents who needed support. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. Years passed. The whole saga of Patricia Kendrick and the fake cops became one of those stories that got told at parties and neighborhood gatherings, usually with new embellishments each time. I had long since stopped correcting people's exaggerated versions. If someone wanted to claim that the fake cops had actually tried to break down my door, or that Patricia had hired a whole squad of imposters, whatever. The core truth of what happened was documented in court records and news articles for anyone who really wanted to know. My navy blue door got repainted several times over the years, always the same color. It became something of a landmark in the neighborhood. "Turn right at the house with the blue door," people would say when giving directions. New residents would hear the story and come by to see the infamous door that had sparked a revolution in suburban HOA governance. I never regretted standing my ground that day. I decided not to repaint my door just because Patricia Kendrick told me to. Not because the door color mattered that much in itself, but because giving in to unreasonable demands from petty tyrants just encourages more unreasonable demands. Sometimes you have to draw a line, even if it's over something as seemingly trivial as paint. The lessons I learned from that experience stayed with me in other areas of life. At work, I became known as someone who would push back against bad ideas or unfair policies, but always in a constructive way. I wasn't contrarian for the sake of it, but I also wasn't a yes man who went along to get along. That balance, knowing when to pick your battles and how to fight them effectively, was something the HOA situation had taught me. Sarah and I eventually had a daughter. We painted her nursery a soft lavender color, and I joked with Sarah that we should probably submit the color choice to the Architectural Review Committee just to be safe. She threw a pillow at me. When our daughter, Emma, was old enough to understand, we told her the story of the blue door and the fake cops, and how sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to people who are wrong, even when it's scary. She thought it was the coolest story ever, and told all her friends that her dad had gotten bad guys arrested just by not painting a door. The Sunset Ridge community continued to thrive. We had our ups and downs, the occasional dispute between neighbors, a few contentious votes on budget items or rule changes. But nothing ever approached the dysfunction of the Patricia Kendrick era. The systems we had put in place, the checks and balances, the culture of reasonableness and respect, those things held strong. I stayed involved with the HOA in various capacities over the years, serving on different committees, helping to interview candidates for the board, offering advice when younger homeowners faced their first encounters with community governance. I wanted to make sure that what we had built didn't slip back into what it had been. Eventually, I aged out of being the young guy who had fought the tyrannical HOA president. New families moved in who had never heard the story firsthand. The blue door was still there, still the same color, but now it was just a nice-looking door on a nice-looking house in a nice neighborhood. Looking back on everything, I felt proud of what had happened. Not proud that I had gotten people arrested or sent to prison. That was never the goal. But proud that I had stood up for myself and for basic fairness, and that doing so had led to positive change for an entire community. Proud that other people in other neighborhoods around the state had stronger protections because of the reforms that came from my case. Most of all, I was proud that the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association had transformed from a tool of harassment and control into an actual community organization that served its members. We had proven that HOAs could work the way they were supposed to, that they didn't have to be the nightmare stories you read about on the internet. But we had also proven that transformation required vigilance and engagement. You couldn't just elect a board and hope for the best. You had to pay attention, attend the meetings, vote in elections, and be willing to speak up when things went wrong. Democracy, even at the level of a suburban HOA, required participation. As I sit here now, many years after that night when fake cops showed up at my door, I can see my blue door from my home office window. It's been repainted again recently, same color as always. Emma is grown now, off at college studying political science. She says she wants to work in government reform, helping to fix broken systems. I like to think maybe her dad's strange experience with an HOA helped inspire that. Sarah is in the kitchen making dinner, and I can smell something delicious cooking. In a few hours, we'll head over to the community center for another HOA meeting, though these days they're pretty routine affairs. Dennis finally stepped down as president last year, and a woman named Carol took over. She's doing a great job, running things efficiently and fairly. Sometimes, I wonder what Patricia Kendrick thinks about now, whether she ever reflects on how differently things could have gone if she had just been reasonable about a door color. Whether she realizes that all the stress and anger and criminal behavior that landed her in prison started because she couldn't accept that someone wanted to paint their door blue instead of beige. But mostly, I don't think about Patricia at all anymore. She's a footnote in my life, a cautionary tale I tell occasionally, but not someone who occupies much mental space. I'm too busy living my life in this community that we built together after her reign ended. The sun is setting over Scottsdale, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. My blue door looks particularly nice in this light. Tomorrow, I'll probably do some yard work, maybe grab coffee with Dennis, definitely spend time with Sarah planning our next vacation. Life in an HOA isn't perfect, but in Sunset Ridge, it's pretty damn good. And every time I walk through my navy blue front door, I'm reminded that standing up for yourself, and for what's right, even in small ways, even when it's just about paint color, can make all the difference in the world.